just kind of starting off here. I was talking with Vaughan a little bit earlier today, and it sounds like really one of the big things to focus on is going to be about tuning and understanding, kind of the way when I'm looking at the rig and what I'm actually looking for in the tuning and what I'm actually looking for to achieve out of the main with the boat. So at the end of the day, if you've read through the guide and the way we've kind of set it up, it's really based around what you actually see in this photo a lot, which are and just as a side note, my screen that the presentation on happens to be here, and the camera that Dell put on my computer happens to be down next to my keyboard down here. So if I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at the screen, which is what you guys are looking at. So the tuning guide is really centered around looking at the overbend wrinkles in the main. And that's why there's that whole section of looking at the guide and trying to, not necessarily using a tension gauge with the rig as much as looking at the guide and trying to decipher what these wrinkles are trying to tell you. And just in this starting line, we have sort of three different setups, just front and center here. We've got some overbend wrinkles showing up here. If you guys can see that, we've got some overbend wrinkles showing up, going all the way down to the clew here off the bottom of the batten. And then we've got a boat with almost no overbend wrinkles in it. And, I really think that's going to speak quite a bit to what the tuning of the boat is going to be. So if we drill into that, at the very most basic setup, the VX mast is pretty soft. And so you're really using the checks and the lowers, and Vaughan, you can correct me if you hear anything that you're.
Yep.
So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the rig is pretty soft, and so we're looking at the lowers and the checks in trying to maintain and keep this sort of bottom half of the rig, the bottom 2/3 of the rig, from just being massively overbent. And so that's the way that I think about the rig tune. The caps, I'm just trying to keep the tip from falling to leeward too much. But my Ds and my checks, I'm really just trying to maintain the bend or lack thereof in this bottom section of the mast. And so if we look at these three boats, we sort of see this one is a bit of an outlier because their boom's a little bit high. So it tells me that they don't have much bang on right now. So it's a little bit hard to see except for the lack of overbend wrinkles in their boat. But we see one here with overbend wrinkles coming off the spreaders basically, or just above the spreaders going down to the clew, and not many overbend wrinkles below that. And we see a second boat with overbend wrinkles going roughly 50% of the way back, except for right down here at the bottom of the sail, where they seem to be going almost all the way through the window. So, when I look at this, I kind of like to have these overbend wrinkles going from about the middle of this panel here, which is between the spreaders and the hounds. I like to have them, sort of tapering out of there and going about 50% of the way back to about that way on the, about there on the boom. And in reality, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to adjust the rig to match that. And a little bit later on, I'll show you the updated tuning guide that we've just kind of, that I've been talking about and we haven't put out yet, I've been working on. But in reality, just looking for these wrinkles to be about 50% of the way back. So in this case, right here, the wrinkles are about 50% of the way back. So I'm pretty okay with my, ignoring everything else, I'm pretty okay with my D2 tension or my sort of lowers tension, whatever's going to the spreaders here. I'm pretty okay with that tension. If I have something that looks like this boat, I'm seeing a lot more wrinkles that go all the way back to the clew. And that's really just telling me that I don't have enough D tension on. And that is with the assumption that the Vang is comfortably set up for this condition, everyone's hiking, the main is trimmed in enough or eased enough that the way these boats are currently set up, in this boat, I'm looking at these overbend wrinkles and I'm saying if I was sailing on that boat, I'd be putting another turn or two turns on the Ds in this photo. In this boat, I would look at that and I would be pretty comfortable with the way those Ds are set up for that vang tension. If we look a little bit further down, then I'm looking at the checks, which are really coming in right where the GNav connects with the mast. And so I'm seeing these wrinkles going all the way back. So that's pretty quickly telling me that I need to put another turn or turn and a half on these check stays for this condition with this vang setup. In this boat, I'm not seeing any of those wrinkles. So I'm saying either those checks are okay, or there's not enough vang on, or they potentially are almost too tight, because I'm not seeing any wrinkles coming back even 50% of the way back. So if I put myself into this boat, I'd look at this rig tension, I'd look up at the main, and I would say overbend wrinkles 50% of the way back. And I'd say overbend wrinkles more than 50%. So I'd say, okay, my lowers tension, the low ones coming in at the spreaders here, no problem. Those are good to go. But my checks, they're a little bit light. And so I'm tensioning the checks to try to get to the bottom of, get these overbend wrinkles. I'm trying to keep this part of the mast straighter, which is going to pull less left curve out of the main, and try to get the, and just keep that part of the mast in check a little bit more. So once I set up my sort of lowers and my checks to get those overbend wrinkles 50% of the way back, that's actually when I look at my caps, the ones that go all rig. So I'm looking at the caps last, and I'm really looking at them, and I'm looking to leeward, and I'm just seeing, I want it to be just going slack, because I know that that's the point where the mast tip is just starting to head to leeward, and I'm not losing any extra head stay tension from that mast tip being falling off to leeward. Another quick check is if I look forward and I look at the actual head stay, and if I'm going over waves and the head stay is bouncing around, that usually is a quick indicator for me that my cap shrouds might be too loose. Because if I have enough Ds on and enough checks on, or lowers and checks, if I've got enough of those on, the mast is going to be sufficiently straight through the bottom here, that really the thing that's controlling the head stay tension is going to be the cap shrouds, and that's what's going to be trying to keep the head stay from bouncing around. So it's a lot of words to say that when I look at the tension and I look at the ratio of the caps and Ds and check stays all together, I'm not looking at the guide as much as I'm looking at what the main is asking for the setup that I'm doing. And so that's the key, is really based around these overbend wrinkles. So when I go to the guide, the 28 and 6 is really just a recommendation, and I've actually ended up quite a bit stiffer than it on some masts, and even stiffer than that on other masts. I've ended up at 28, 22, and 16 at times as my base numbers that I don't go any looser than, and I've ended up at 28, 18, 12 at times as my base numbers, depending upon the boat, the spreader sweeps, the mast, all that kind of stuff. So the guide really is, it's a lot of a suggestion, because the masts are pretty different from boat to boat. So it's just making sure that looking up at the main, is really the biggest key that I'm trying to get to the bottom of when I'm actually tuning and looking at the rig. Does that kind of make sense to everyone as I talk about it? Is that not old news? Is everyone comfortable looking at that?
Yeah, I think, Mike, that's really good, because that's sort of where people have been getting a little lost, I think, with the combination of the lowers and the checks and the cap shroud, getting the head stay up, with the vang tension has been sort of a thing that people are chasing. And I get one question I would say is that, as the mainsail ages and maybe, the luff curve shrinks out a little, do you still then alter your rig tune to suit what you're seeing? So all I'm saying is that with a brand new mainsail with a nice fresh luff curve, your settings may change over a season or so as the luff curve shrinks a little.
I think that's
or is that a
absolutely the
good
case.
time to get the sail back to the loft and get the luff curve put back in it?
Yeah, could be either of those, but I think it's absolutely the case. And I think the really interesting thing for me is that when I get off the water, someone says, "Where were you tuned?" And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the tuning numbers answer to that question. And I think that in my head speaks volumes to the way that I'm tuning the boat, is that I'm really not worried about what the numbers on the gauge say. I'm more worried about getting those overbend wrinkles to be 50% of the way back. And no matter what the age of the sail is, what the mast is, what everything is, I'm really just focused on trying to make sure that I'm centered around those overbend wrinkles. So what does that mean though? I mean, in reality, what that means is that you sort of have to sail the boat in a similar way that I guess that I'm sailing it as well, which means, the boat is essentially an overgrown laser in my head for those of us that have sailed lasers, and you sail upwind with enough bang on that you're bending the boom. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen a VX boom bend, but it's a kind of a scary time because you look at it bending and you say, that's a pretty big piece of carbon to be bending with, with some little pins and pieces of string. But it's, I've certainly sailed with the boom bent, and that's just giving a testament to how much bang in breeze that we sail with. So I think the thing is that the way to think about the way that I sail the boats, at least, is it's really centered around making sure that I'm able to maintain the leech tension on the main. So in light air, I'm trying to stall that upper leech telltale 50% of the time. And what I'm trying to do there, what I'm trying to achieve, is I'm trying to get people hiking against the boat. Because when the keel cord is this short and you have nothing keeping the boat going sideways, it's accelerated. So putting the bow down, trimming the main really hard, harder than you think, and actually getting people hiking against it provides a lot more leeway in the boat against that foil. And so what that does is that increases the boat speed. And so I'm doing everything I can to get leech tension into the main. But when the mast is really soft, which it is, if you don't have the rig tension on enough, you end up just way over bending the rig. So if that kind of follows, and that train of thought follows, as you go further up the wind range, you're replacing the main sheet tension for vang tension to try to keep and engage the leech of the main. And you're loading the lower point of the lower portion of the mast even more as you shift from sheet tension to vang tension. So that's why you have to bring those Ds and checks up as you're shifting. But there is a point in very light air where you can't actually ease the shrouds off anymore. And the more I've been sailing the boat, the more I felt that point was actually quite a bit tighter than you think, because I'm trimming the main so hard that without having the Ds and checks on, I'm unable to trim the main hard enough without the upper leech just falling totally open and those overbend wrinkles going completely through the sail. Does that kind of make sense, what I'm thinking about there and the way that I'm looking at it?
Yep.
Vaughan, I missed it's Peter here. I missed the beginning of this, so I'm not sure whether you're okay with verbal questions or whether you're looking for some other way, but I had some questions and comments, if I could, with Mike.
It's exactly what we're after, Pete.
Okay. Hi, Mike. Thanks for that update. I must say that all rings very true with us. And one input I would have is I found at one point we started going a little bit tight on the lowers, and that meant it forced a really hard bend around. Sorry, we started going really tight on the checks, and it forced quite a hard bend around where the spreader was, and that led to us having to put too much lowers on in order to avoid that really bad overbend. And we sort of chased our tail for a bit until we started loosening the checks off a little bit more. because otherwise we were kind of jamming the boat up a little bit. But that was just a comment. My real question came down to you talked about sheeting the main until the upper telltale stalls on the main. What we find is that the telltale at the third batten stalls way before we can get anything higher than that stalled. Does that ring true with you? And if not, can you think of something we may be doing wrong? I mean, we've kind of improved that situation by putting a slightly stiffer batten in at number 3, which makes it a little bit more even, but the sail to me wants to stall there first.
I think that case. I certainly think that it does try to stall at the number 3, very, and that's the one that I am trying to get it to stall at. But at least, when I sail with pretty loose on the D's and the checks, I'm finding very quickly that I just keep trimming and that thing barely stalls. It's, and what it comes down to is the fact that I'm almost sailing outside the jib telltales. I'm sailing on the outside telltales with the jib telltales either both going completely straight back or the outside ones occasionally dancing in light air. And then I'm trimming extremely hard on the main. I'm just trying to think back to what actual batten I am looking at, because now you have me wondering about it. So in reality, I'm actually looking at this one up here. I'm looking at the higher telltale as well. I'm pretty sure based on what I'm seeing here. So I'm looking at both of these, and I'm even trying to get this one up top to start to stall. That's what I'm trying to do as well. And frankly, the thing that I'm aiming to do there is that even if the main is over trimmed and that's stalled 100% of the time, and the number 3 is stalled 100% of the time, if that means that I can get someone else out hiking or even sitting on the rail, I think it's an advantage. And it's proved and it's borne out on the water for that to be an advantage. And sometimes when I really pull that hard on the main sheet, I don't know what height you guys are sailing with your bridles at in the back, or if you guys have measured a height, but I'm sailing with it. If you look in these photos, this is that's probably almost high for what we're sailing with it at. We're sailing with it 660 millimeters above the floor, above the tiller pod. So just over 2 feet, something like that. And so it's pretty low, and I'm trimming 2 blocked a lot of the time. And the goal is not actually worried about, the goal is really looking at the telltales to try to get them stalled, but just trying to get someone else hiking. And in that medium to light air, if I can get someone else hiking, it's an advantage every time, just because the boat goes sideways more, and therefore more lift, and therefore more acceleration.
You just need to take H sailing more often, Pete.
Yeah, and look, we don't have a problem getting enough tension on there, that's for sure, because we do find it that we can over trim the main around, particularly if that number 3 batten is stalled 100% of the time. Then we are definitely low. We've got the double barrel. We're low and slow until we just get that flowing, maybe at least 25% of the time or a little bit more. So we've definitely explored trimming too hard, and that doesn't work.
So the one question I have is that if you're low and slow, normally if you're trimmed too hard, you're high and slow. And I wonder if you're low and slow, if it actually, if there are overbend coming from the spreaders down to the clew, and the main is starting to get too flat through that section. I'm wondering if that's giving away your height, and then even though the top is stalled, the mid leach is just falling open.
We have had that problem at times. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think that's what I'm seeing typically. It just, you know, if you stall the sail too badly, it's not going to go well, is my experience. So
yeah, it's funny. It sounds like sounds like a bit like the MC38, real, you know, real wide bottom boat, real tiny core depth on the centerboard, and yeah, mainsail trim on that thing's the same. You make it look pretty, and then you just keep winding it, and you look at it and go, that's just wrong, and the boat just goes quicker and quicker and quicker. So it's something to explore. Pete, you said you'd missed the first bit. Did you hear when Mike was talking about the overbend wrinkles and in the mainsail and what? Yeah, okay, yeah. Which I think is something that we've all sort of talked about and explored over the last couple of years, and so that all makes perfect sense.
I think we're pretty onto that, and interestingly, I think if I understand the numbers you just had up on the screen there, Mike, that's kind of, and that's very closely related to how we've ended up with ours, which is different to the original North guide. It's I just saw them; they were up on the screen a moment ago.
Yeah, so I should have just put them back up there. Hopefully you guys can see that. And this is kind of where, hopefully it'll come through in a second here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of where I'm thinking about the adjustment, my latest adjustment, which is sort of keeping that base of 28. And so this is sort of from 4 to 10 knots when you're, maybe it's 5 to 10 knots when you're fully sheeted on the main sheet trying to, you know, but then at 10 knots, you can hike without easing the main sheet. You're just sort of replacing a little bit of ang tension. You really haven't started easing the main yet. So that's kind of what this base setting is. And I've been, you know, my new ones are kind of 28 on the caps, and I've gone to about 17 on the Ds, on the, you know, the intermediate shrouds, you know, whatever you want to call them. And then I've gone to about 11 on the check stays. And another piece of that is that I've been moving the check stays with, one thing I've been experimenting with is moving the check stays in keeping with the other shrouds. Because as you go on the Ds, you pull that section of the mast back and the check stays actually get looser if you do it at the dock. So it seems to be a pretty straightforward ratio for the rig that I've now started to go to instead of this 3, 6, whatever. I've started just going for every 2 turns on the cap shrouds, I go 1 on the intermediates and I go a half on the check stays. Once I've got the rig lined up in the way that I like it with, you know, with those overbend wrinkles going 50% of the way back for the mast, I'm just very simply going 2, 1 and a half on the rig. And I'm just trying to keep it. And this one down below base setting sort of comes only when it's so light that trimming the main really hard doesn't get anyone else hiking. And at that point, you actually have to ease the sheet to get the boat going. And that's, you know, that's really that light air setting. So if that makes sense a little bit, or I could dive into that a little bit more, or is that sort of what you guys have been finding too?
Yeah, that's the exact ratio we ended up with probably for the last year or so.
Yeah, that makes sense, perfect sense to me, and really simple.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's sort of, this was all from last summer, getting it, you know, and just basically sailing here all last summer and saying, you know, this is kind of where we've ended up. And then I jumped on a different boat and crewed for someone at the Midwinters this year, and they had a different mast. So I've been sailing on 269, and that's, I normally drive that boat, and then I was crewing on 241, and the 241 mast seemed to be a little bit softer. So we ended up a little bit more on the intermediates and the checks, but otherwise the ratio held once, you know, once we've got there, and we were able to sail completely through that ratio. So I've double checked it there. And then about 2 months ago, got on another boat, 240, with a pretty green crew, and it bore out again, the same setup. So once you find the base setting that you're comfortable with for your boat, and it's not even the cap shrouds, it's really the intermediates and the check stays, that base setting then that 2, 1.5 setting really is, it keeps it very, very simple, I think.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah.
with those new cap shroud tensions, we would find that rig falling out of the boat to leeward in the mid range, 14 to 18 with only 6 turns up. So we notice you've gone down tension on your caps.
Yeah, I think it probably is a function of being tighter on the lowers and the Ds. I will say that there have been times where if it's really wavy, this is a bit of a flat water setup because a lot of the venues that we sail in flat water, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be afraid that in this upper end you could go +2 turns, +3 turns here, and not, I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of that. Just if it was really wavy, and that's where that piece that I was talking about, that there was a time where the breeze came out a different direction. It had a huge amount of fetch. We had a lot of waves, and we went 3 turns just outside of our base on the caps, just because when I looked up, the headstay was bouncing around, and this ratio held. But when the headstay was bouncing, needed to come on. But in most of the places that we've been sailing, this just felt too tight on the caps. You started to get the top of the main just washing out before you even got to the bottom of the Vang range. It felt too tight, because when you go this much tighter on the intermediates and the checks,
that tightens the side stays anyway.
Yeah, it tightens the side stays anyway. And when you pull the Vang on that hard, it bends the mast further up. And so the cap shrouds, the side stays being tighter, the cap shrouds being tighter, and the Vang pushing further up means that you're actually, even with this number being 6 instead of 10, you're probably at a similar depth in the top of the main there. So I think it's all related.
Yeah, thank you.
Mike, when you talk about how tight your Vang gets, how tight is that relative to how hard you can pull? And do you use somebody else to perhaps bend the line as it runs along the floor and get it even tighter?
So I haven't yet used someone else to bend the line, but the one thing that we've done is we've rebuilt our Vang to give us maximum throw, which I think was a huge change. We were able to get on way more Vang when we rebuilt it. And so it was 2 things. It was that section inside the boom, using tapered lines for that section inside the boom, pretty small tapered lines, and upping the size of at least one of the blocks in there. And then what we did, which is all able to do inside the class rules, and then what I'm doing is we set it so that when I'm at the dock, I have to ever so slightly push down on the end of the boom to get the Vang to go onto the mast, to get the G-nav to get to the pin onto the mast. So that's the end of my throw with the lines all the way eased. And then I was able to get another sort of 3/4 of an inch. So, another 15 mils along the mast, on the boom, or along the boom with the shoe when I did that rebuild. And I'm pulling it until I can't pull it anymore. And I end up with, when I can't pull the line anymore, I end up with probably 35 mil of deflection in the middle of the boom. I'm guessing if I put a string in there, it'd be closer to 50 mil. But just from looking at it, when you're, looking at the actual deflection in the boom, it looks like it's about 35 mil deflection. And that's it's not laser amount of deflection, which is, 150 mil, but it's enough to make sure that you're considering breaking something. If you, it's been hard enough that we use, because we basically haul in and out on a hoist here every night, we use quick pins instead of regular pins and ring dings on the boom itself and on the GNAV, and we bent those, we torqued those hard internally that the weld broke and the quick pin broke. So the tube stayed, but the weld broke internal to the quick pin. And that's when it's captured between the two sides. And the only thing is that little, 5 mil piece of boom that's pushing against the middle. So there was a significant amount of force there that we're putting onto it. And it was definitely around rebuilding the Vaughan, which I can't stress that enough. If you get a new boat, that would be the thing that I would stress the largest to do is double check on that. How the Vaughan is set up inside and making sure you have maximum throw before things run out.
And Mike, as it gets up to 20 knots or thereabouts, do you retain the max Vaughan, or do you start to ease that a little bit to twist a little bit more versus maintain the Vaughan and use more Cunningham to twist the top of the main?
It's actually an interesting one, and this is one where I tend to sail the boat a little bit differently than a lot of other people, in that when it gets to 20, 23 knots, I'm 25 knots. And we tend to sail fairly light. I'm sailing 2 up, so it's on the lighter side, but we're generally been very fast against teams that are 3 up in the breeze. And I actually leave the Vaughan on, and I don't do a whole lot with the Cunningham. And in reality is because I'm pulling the Vaughan that hard, the main is really flat up high already. And I'm also easing the main sheet a lot. In 20 knots, I'll have the main sheet a good 1.5 meters, 2 meters away from the blocks. And, it's I don't know, it's double this distance at least away from the blocks in the boat. And really, I'm just easing the main sheet to until the heel until the boat's flat. So the boat's designed to sail at 8 degrees of heel. And, it's sailing in at upwind, 8 degrees, 8 degrees of heel is awkwardly flat. And that's kind of where we sail the boat. And in order to get there, I'm just easing the main until the boat gets that flat. And generally that means that I'm in the biggest pressure. The first step is, as soon as I start easing the main, I need to crack the jib sheet first. So I crack the jib sheet roughly maybe 25, 35 mils. And then I start, and I'm basically just dropping the jib car as I feel the main luff and backwind from the jib. I'm basically just dropping the jib car, and then as I'm dropping the jib car, I'm actually able to sail more inside the telltales on the jib. And and I've had times where we've sailed with the jib car 50 mils from the bottom of the track for extended periods of time. At times in the puff, it was all the way at the bottom of the track. And with the main, 1 meter, 1.5 meters, nearly 2 meters out. And I find that I don't need to necessarily, I give up too much height if I start pulling the Cunningham too hard there, or easing the Vaughan. I just end up with if I ease the Vaughan, I end up with a deeper shape, which is pretty draggy. So my go-to is just easing the main sheet. It's hard to, it's like watching the 49ers going upwind. It's just, everything is controlled on the main sheet for me when I'm sailing the boat. It's all based around that. And then sailing the boat very, very flat. And I'm sure that's kind of where you guys have ended up sailing them as well. And maybe that answers your question, hopefully.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That's kind of how we sail it, but I wondered about whether people start to ease their Vaughan a bit. I don't know. I think Will's on the call. He goes pretty well in that sort of condition.
I'm here if you can hear me.
Yeah, can. Well, except that you then muted yourself again, Will.
Okay, I'm back. How's that?
Yep.
Beautiful.
Any thoughts on that there, Will? Is that similar to what you guys are doing?
In principle, yes, it is. I mean, we're easing the main a lot and trying to keep the boat flat. I think the trouble that we have is beyond that point where maybe it's gusting higher, but it feels like when we get to 25 knots, where the jib car's right down the bottom, the pins on the bottom hole, the tack positions on the bottom hole, and it's that fine point where you don't want to ease the sheet itself because you're sort of powering the jib up, and you do because you're overpowered because the main's flogging even with the car right down, and the main's too far out, so you're trying to balance not flogging the main and keeping the jib going at its 100% power. So that's where we struggle, and I guess cause for trying to get a flatter jib in principle.
And this is a really interesting one, because this conversation has gone down that rabbit hole of, if you ease the main, you start to lose the forestay as well, because if you ease the bang and the main, you start to lose the forestay, because the mast gets a little bit straighter, and you now don't have the main sheet tension, you don't have any bang tension, you've got nothing really keeping the forestay down. I dealt with this a little bit this winter down south, where we basically someone in crewing, I had to describe what I was talking about, and I don't know how much you guys sail inside the jib once you get the car all the way down at the bottom of the track. And one of the things that I've found is that you actually the boat actually sails better if you start as soon as you get about 3/4 of the way down in the track. I found that you've already gotten all of the power out of the jib that you can possibly need. And so actually bearing off just continues to power the boat up more. And I've almost sailed with the front, 100 mils of the jib starting to back, if not slightly more than that. And you're really just sailing off the leech of the jib at that point. So I don't have to ease the sheet as you're talking about. And I don't have to, and that the boat's gone pretty well like that for us, at least, just sailing a little bit more inside the jib, because once it's eased, you're actually just giving away power at that point, and then turning down is just powering back up what you've eased to try to get rid of power. So I'm thinking that might be, and I don't know if that's what you guys are. I'd be interested to know where you guys are sailing inside the jib.
We do that, Mike, and it just comes down to how much chop there is, and
Right.
The more you do that, obviously the less momentum you have to get through the chop and the wash. So where we sail, sometimes there's quite a fair amount of short chop, current created chop, and so you're trying to keep the momentum going through the waves. In
Right.
the flat conditions, if we have a westerly blowing and it's flatter, and then it's easier to do that, obviously, relative to the opposition that keep their boats going in the chop.
Right. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So, and I guess at that above that 25 knot range, you're really doing anything you can to depower the sails without them flapping, because flapping is obviously slow, and and you're basically you're on the edge of the jib sheeted out until it starts flapping. And I had to sail an entire race one time when it got up to 30 with the top of the jib just starting to break, and it was the only real way to get the boat even upwind, because the boat doesn't necessarily go upwind anymore unless you're sailing with 3 people. We were only 2 up again, and so we were kind of in that place where we were definitely compromised on the edge of the ranges. We kind of wanted to cut half the main off, but it wouldn't have been good for the rest of the event. So, yeah. So does anyone else have any other questions? Vaughan, go ahead on that trimming stuff while we're still here.
Yeah, I guess I'm just interested, Mike, around the, if we come back down the range, I don't know, 10, 15 range and a little bit gusty, what have you found the go-to in terms of jib trim? Is it tend to be car or sheet that you would play through that range?
So
bearing in mind that we've usually got what you'd call reasonably choppy conditions, not ocean swell, but pretty choppy. It's certainly not lake sailing.
But gusty is what you're saying.
Yeah, if as it gusts up and down the range, is your go-to to the sheet or to the jib car?
So I did a lot of experimenting as a crew again this winter. And I found that the first step is once you start to break the main, your first step of freeing the boat up is easing the sheet, that 25, 35 mils that I was talking about. And then after that, we've turned the cleat, the bottom jib car cleat upside down, so it's the right way up for normal sailing. And that meant that I ended up in the Gus maintaining the leash tension with the sheet and just sliding the car up and down on the track. And that seemed very quick because I could respond. The boat is not exactly, it's not exactly like we're sailing a 12 meter here. It needs a little bit of quick response, and I could respond a lot faster and do a lot more and be a lot more on top of it when I was playing the car than I could when I was playing the sheet. When I was playing the sheet, I would end up with just getting round in the foot of the jib and having the top twist off, as opposed to just moving the whole wing down. So that's something that I'm going to work on for the future is really working on making sure making sure I have any of the boats on that cleat is the right way up. And then I'd be using the jib car in and out, because I think you can move faster and it matches, in reality, it matches the leash profile, the main better as you ease the main and play the main in that condition. So you're maintaining the profiles and the way the sails are looking as you're going through the condition.
Yeah, I think I'd be interested in Will's view, but we've found something similar. But if I understand what you're saying that from the tightest you would get on the jib, your first step would be just to crack that a little bit to get a little bit more twist. Beyond that, then you're playing the sheet. And yeah, we too have turned our cleat upside down some time ago.
Yeah, and I think as you get a little bit further down the range, even there are times where you have a sheet cracked, a good 100, 150 mils sometimes away from the block as you start to play way far down in the range of the car. But certainly for my gust response, I'd be using the kind of the course tune is the sheet for us, and the gust response is the car. That's kind of the way we've been doing it.
Yeah, that's how we've been doing it as well, Mark. It's on the gust, just easing the car. I always go car first and then maybe sheet. But yeah.
Right.
What about a wave sequence, Mike? If you're just sailing along in reasonably flat, then you get a little pattern of waves comes through banging around. You pop a bit of sheet or just car down again.
I think it depends a little bit on how big they are, and then what was lean on the jib a little bit, and not even necessarily pop a little bit of sheet if they're fairly small waves that I can, it kind of the waves that aren't going to come over the bow, but you're going to feel the boat sort of smack into a couple of times. You just we kind of just put the bow down a little bit and let and maybe I'll straighten the tailtails in 12, 15 knots. I'll straighten the tailtails, or I'll maybe touch the leeward one, just almost break the leeward one and let the boat go, and potentially ease in the sheet there. But with the top being so high aspect, at times it's so, I get a little bit worried about people easing the sheet on the jib, because, you ease it 10 mils and the top changes massively. And so someone goes to take it out of the cleat because of a wave set, and they end up easing it 25, 35 mils, and all of a sudden the top of your jib's in that rabbit hole of just having, now you're trying to power up, and all of a sudden you've actually ended up depowering the jib. So at times, obviously if they're big waves, I'm going to be bow down, easing the main a little bit more, and with that we'll probably, if I am bow down, easing the main, with that I'm probably doing that initial crack. Let's say I haven't done that yet. I'm doing that initial crack on the jib to get that slightly more twisted open, and it just matches the twist of the main profile a little bit better.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
So,
Mike, you touched on the the heel of the boat, which is a pretty critical thing. A lot of people are talking about sort of weight position as well, fore and aft in the boat. You mentioned a few times you sail at 2 up, which is obviously going to be easier to get your center of gravity all nice and close. But is there a magical thing you're looking for as far as like the bow in the water and etc. Sort of up and downwind?
Yeah, so that's a really good one. And I've been kind of messing around with this a lot just to try to understand. I really want to get one of those Vacroses, which has the inclinometer, the fore and aft, right, for pitch. But in terms of heel, I'm looking for the windward hull to basically 7, 8 degrees of heel, which basically, if you look in this photo, you can kind of see it on Chris's boat here. The windward hull is just getting slapped by the wave tops. And that's really, the windward chine is just getting slapped by the wave top. That's kind of where I'm aiming to be sailing. The difference is that if I was sailing 3 up in this condition, I would have, I would push this person in front of the shrouds, which means that it's a little bit difficult for them to hike. But the bungee that holds we changed our bungee to a line that holds the front of and I'm not sure whether, whether that bulkhead's designed to take it or not, but we changed it to a line mostly because it holds the straps up better. And then that front person puts their feet under that line going to the front of the boat, and they will hike. And I have found that has been able to, that more not, when I've sailed with 3 people, that has been able to save me in light air upwind, is, making it so that I can, moving that person in front of the shrouds and not moving them back until I sort of if I take 3 waves in a row over the bow, that's when I start moving them back. It's like that, the 3rd wave, and you start to see it lap over the bow a little bit. That's when I'll move them back. But otherwise, in light air, getting that person forward just means that I have flat water coming out from behind the boat. And that's really what my end game is. So I'm looking to be, far enough forward. And so upwind, I sailed the whole North Americans with my 100-pound crew in front of the boat in front of the shrouds from probably 6, 7 knots all the way up to 12, 13, 14 knots in Newport, because the boat just felt like it was going better and the light spots. And the did well at that North Americans. We ended up winning that one, so it couldn't have been that slow. So we were very comfortable doing that. And we learned that a couple of years back when we sailed on a light air night for our beer can racing. We moved someone, we kind of felt like we were sticky and we were the only 3 up boat out there. And we moved someone in front of the shrouds, and we were immediately, the boat just loosened up and we lost, a lot of the drag that we had, and the thing totally changed. So getting someone in front of the shrouds, and then same thing downwind when it's light, we had that for that North Americans, we had that person jibing in front of the shrouds, grabbing the mast and rolling off the mast, which I'm sure I've seen photos of you guys doing as well. And jibing and rolling off the mast, and then, downwind, in and out. Usually if I'm sailing 3 up, I'll have the boat heeled up that 2 people are sort of comfortably sitting on the side in the light air and 1 person's in. And then if it's breezy, 2 people kind of shoulders leaning back and 1 person leaning, out of the boat. I have found that getting the boat too flat downwind in light air seems to really slow the boat down. The extra drag that you get from getting that windward hull, really stuck to the water, really seems to slow the boat down in light air. So being able to be in a place where you're keeping that the windward side of the hull just above the water seems to be pretty quick downwind, which is, kind of leading you to bow up enough. But then also in light stuff, when you do get the puff, almost it's a little counterintuitive to use the rudder a little bit more and use the kite sheet to turn the boat down, as opposed to trying to dinghy style, squish the boat down and stick it into the water when you're in that light air. And in light air downwind, I'll have someone sitting, whoever's, we actually switch. So I'll have if it's really light, I'll be holding the kite sheet sitting about here. And I think I have photos of it a little bit later. Yeah, so I'm almost, in this photo, this person seems a little bit flat. So we're here, and you can see the windward hull's just kind of out. There's just enough pressure to kind of keep the boat going. I'm in front of the shrouds, and the person behind who is driving in this one is basically up against the shrouds. And, the boat's kind of powered up and flat water coming out behind it. And then at times, if it got lighter, I would go down here and I'd actually pass the kite sheet as a crew. I'd pass it off to the driver because they can feel the boat better. And I would take the main sheet and look back for pressure. So we kind of do that switch when we're sailing 2 up. And when we're 3 up, we just have someone kind of in the middle and someone basically all the way to leeward hiking and then on the floor kind of thing if it gets really light. And then as it gets breezy, we're, obviously consistently moving backwards to the point of, and any time that you feel like the bow's up and the boat's comfortably planing, you should be, a body width behind the shrouds, I think, even if you're 3 people, just because it's allowing the bow to come up, and allowing that bow to come up is just reducing the wetted surface in the boat. And I've tried it both ways, and I felt like putting the bow down to try to reduce the drag from behind the boat just really wasn't working because the boat was on the step. And so getting back to allow the bow to come up was the easier way to reduce drag. Hopefully that helps.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's really good.
Have you guys seen it a little bit differently or similar to that?
I would say that we've not tried hiking with one person in front of the shrouds at anything like up to 12 knots, maybe more likely up to sort of 7 or 8 knots, but it's worth a try for sure. That'll be comfortable for you, Steve.
Your crew's more than 100 pounds, though. Could put
I don't
Ashley.
think he's talking about you, Stevie.
It seems like the center of effort in the boat for the crew wants to be about a body width behind the shrouds. So if you've got 3, it's sort of putting someone in front and someone behind kind of keeps it a body width. When you have 2, you kind of have to have both people behind. So I think that's what it seems to be up until you take sort of 3 waves over the bow. That's kind of that's my tell. So
we'll give it a go.
Yeah, nice.
Good.
So there's two other topics that Vaughan sort of asked me to touch on here. First one, CST versus Southern Masts. I haven't seen a CST mast. I know that there's some been built. I'm gonna strategically avoid that question, any questions associated with it here, because I have no idea about them right now. I'm hoping to get one here soon enough.
There's 6 boats arriving today actually, and they're the first of the CSTs, I believe. So we're in the same boat. So we'll just, see how it rolls.
Let me know what you guys find, because I'm just as interested as you guys are, and I think it's pretty important. Obviously, the implications on the main and the luff curve and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm under no preconceived notions that we might not be providing if the tuning can't fix any differences between them. But from what I've heard, they're supposed to be the same. So
we're hoping that one of
told.
our, again, actual customers has got a boat coming. It's in the next lot. So I think that arrives August-ish. And he'll be hopefully using our sails. So I guess that'll probably be our first opportunity to check it all out, and we'll report back.
Perfect. I've asked JC to air freight one to us, or I'm working on trying to get that done. So if I find out first, I'll certainly let you guys know as well.
Yeah, great.
Can I ask a question about your previous slide you had up in the light wind? Mike, just sorry to go back, but we were talking about going downwind and we normally sail 3 up and we have someone around the mast. But when it gets really light, do you ever roll the jib away?
Oh, in this slide, yes, but it generally happens after I've moved to leeward. So if it's so light that I'm sitting in the middle of the boat or to leeward, that's the time that I roll the jib away.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And I think realistically in this image, we're right on the cusp here. It's a little windier than it looks because the current was going with the wind, and it always is windier than it looks in the photos. But I definitely have found that certainly rolling the jib away is really important. As soon as you start to trim the kite back so that you end up seeing the clew, back near the boom, or back behind in the window of the boom as a driver, it's time to get rid of the jib, I think. So yes, absolutely. The last thing to talk about I have is on the new jib, which I'm sure you guys have seen down there at times, and I'm not sure which one, if anyone on the call has had it, but I've used it as well here. And personally, I've even used it in light air, and I haven't thought that there was any detriment to the boat in light air and to that jib. So I've been quite happy with it. It is slightly flatter in the head. It is slightly more luff curve down low, and the battens are rocked ever so slightly forward. And I'm sure, as you guys have seen, there is, an extra piece of reinforcement in the clew to kind of keep the foot round and the clew a little straighter in the exit. So all of those pieces are in line with trying to make a sail that goes up range a little bit better. So it basically means that what we're trying to do is I was trying to flatten the head, so you end up trimming the sheet a little bit harder. So the leech is actually ever so slightly shorter. So the girths have moved up a little bit, and the battens rocking forward have flattened the lower back part of the jib a little bit. And that extra entry down low means that at no time am I really sailing with my outside telltales breaking, which in light air I've kind of felt at times I've needed to. The trade-off with that sail is that you have to sail with a slightly tighter halyard than you're used to. You can't ever have the halyard so loose that there's big wrinkles coming under the zipper. And the thing to think about on that is the zipper does give quite a bit of support to the luff. So if you only had hanks, the halyard with the same halyard tension the luff would look a lot looser with hanks than it does with the zipper. So if you get too loose, all that extra luff curve that was put into the sail, and when I say all that, it wasn't very much, that extra luff curve that was put into the sail ends up pushing, it doesn't end up going into the sail, it just kind of sits against the headstay, which makes you have the feeling that the jib is very difficult to drive to, because you're never able to find the groove. Sometimes you're out of it, sometimes you're in it, because there's just so much cloth that hasn't been pushed into the sail there to create entry. It's just sort of hanging off the front of it. And so that extra halyard is pushing that cloth into the sail, and it's rounding up the entry and making the sail much easier to sail.
Yeah, we sort of, traditionally we sail here, Mike, in sort of, let's say 8 to 18 knots, but I guess it was last season, or maybe the one before, we had a particularly windy sort of season where we sailed really sort of 14 to 25 knots every day, it seemed. And that's sort of where the changes were born in the jib, and so far so good. It's been well received. So.
And obviously the change in cloth as well.
Yeah.
That you guys have seen, which is the difference in the cloth is just to make it slightly better on the furler, I think.
We used that, Mike. We used that jib, the new one, the prototype first, and then we got a new one after that. And I can confirm it was way better in the breeze, and we maintained in light winds. So it was quite nice in flat water. I felt, although as you mentioned, controlling that leach up top was a little harder and a little more sensitive to the sheet.
Exactly. And the you know, the thing to remember is that the clue is 25 millimeters higher on that sail than on the other sail, than on the original sail. And that's just because I was sort of expecting that you were going to have to trim the sheet harder to control that upper leach. And you were already, you know, when you sail the boat, you're already so close to being two blocked with it that it needed a little bit more, you know, a little bit more distance to actually play the game in there.
Yes, as feedback, I would have thought we're at the verge. We've used it for a while now, but we're at the verge of putting a shackle and tack to raise it, because it's getting to block quite quickly.
Right, and that makes sense, especially if you're light on the halyard, especially on that side of it as well. So, yeah, really happy to help. And you know, again, if Vaughan has my email as well, and it's pretty easy to have. If you guys have any questions, just shoot me an email, you know, shoot me a WhatsApp. It's all no problem. Just send them along, and I'm happy to help where I can. Even if you guys take photos of your, you know, of your setup and any of that stuff, and want to chat about it. It sounds like we're all basically on the same page, but you know, I'm available as a resource as you guys need, as you guys see fit, and you know, we can kind of keep plugging away and learning how to make the boats go even better. So you know, happy to help, and thank you guys for making it out this evening or this morning for you guys.
Thanks. Just if I can ask you one last question, if I may, Mike. Just in respect to setting up the keel and when you bolt it down, do you at all play with that 1 inch, sort of 3/4 inch play in the moving the keel fore and aft when you bolt it down?
Not actively, but I do know that our keel is on 269. Our keel is, I have to push that top forward in order to get to bolt it down. I have to push forward on the top, whether that means that I'm raking it more back, which I think it is, which is potentially putting a little bit more helm in the boat, which is potentially not a bad thing, because as flat as I sail it, the helm is very neutral, very neutral. So, and that's been a consistent thing for us out of it.
Okay.
But I haven't actively done it.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that.
Sounds like a trick question.
Yeah, I am right. That you can make with the keel plate and the bolts on the top, you know, it's arguably, however much it is, there is movement that you can make there. You know, but the project that I'm currently on is taking one of the original Bennett boats and lightening the keel on it, and I'm going to go sail that, because I suspect that you sail the boat so flat that a boat with a lighter keel, which you're allowed to do to get the boat to weight if it is overweight, might be better, because it will actually roll in light air. You could roll tack it and roll jibe it a lot better. So that's my suspicion, and I'll report back on that one.
That's good.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike, for your time. It's been greatly appreciated. You can go and have that glass of wine now, or beer, Friday night. We'll
exactly.
Get on with our Saturday duties.